Thank you for joining me on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Kerry Kerr McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience. Each week, I will take a vulnerable look at the nitty-gritty details of narcissistic abuse, at the underlying dynamics that make these relationships so challenging. This is a listener-supported podcast, so thank you for considering becoming a sponsor for less than the cost of a cup of coffee. Sometimes we as victims can't see what's happening right in front of us. It's a form of literal blindness. Today, Rossana Faye joins me to discuss how this happens. And the self-help tip is using your emotional experience of feeling trapped or confused, or even sensing that something's wrong or off as a way to alert you to this possible problem. Have you heard of betrayal blindness before, Ro?
No, I haven't.
I hadn't either, but I came across it recently when I was listening to Dr. Ramani talk about how some victims don't see what's happening, even though it's really happening right in front of them. And she talks about this book, and so I picked it up and I've been reading. It's called Blinded Betrayal, written by Dr. Jennifer Freyd. And Dr. Freyd has done a lot of research into this, and she has looked into why some victims, actually a lot of us, most of us, don't actually see that there's something going wrong right in front of us, that we literally can't see it. She's using the word blindness in a very exact way. She means we don't see it. She gives an example in the book that I thought was utterly fascinating. There's a woman whose husband was picked up for child pornography, and in their home, he actually had literature lying around that was inappropriate. And when the detectives came in to confiscate all the material, they talked to her and they picked up one of the pieces of material that had been sitting out on the center table, on the I can't think of that word.
Coffee table?
Yeah, coffee table.
Yeah.
He picked up one of the pieces sitting on the coffee table and asked her, "What did you think of this?" And she said, "I don't know. It's here. I may not like it, but it's here." And he said, "But what do you think of it?" And she says, I don't know. I don't see any problem." He said, "No, I mean, take a look at it." And he had her thumb through it. And he said that he watched her eyes move over the page and failed to see the inappropriate sexual content. And it was years later when she picked up the same material and looked at it, she said, "I don't know how I didn't see it. It was so clear. I didn't see it, but it was clear. This was inappropriate and it was in my house and I couldn't see that how wrong it was." Did you ever have that happen to you?
I'm trying to think. It's almost like a visual dissociation. Like you just choose not to, or maybe we mentally check out. I think that there were times definitely in my marriage where I mentally checked out, or I was blind. Yeah, blindness. It's like this fog comes over you and you just refuse to see the mess, or you refuse to see something wrong. I think there was a lot of dissociation, like yelling, screaming, and I would just look at it like, this is just a Tuesday, I just, I'm not, I guess anybody else walking into my home. I think now that I think about it, my mom, she was at our house one time when we were in a pretty big fight, and he was saying some really awful things. He was insulting me. And at this point, he didn't really care who was around. And my mom was like, "Does he always talk to you like that? Are you scared of him? Aren't you scared? What was he saying about this and that?" And to me, I was just like, no, I'm not scared of him. It's just he's mad. That would be like a visual dissociation, like that blindness. I would see that for sure. Yeah.
I know I know your story quite well because you and I also talk about it between us as friends. And I do know that he was probably up to more than you realized he was, or maybe there's a part of you that knew, but maybe you didn't want to know,
Yeah.
or even how much he was drinking even, there's a part of you that knew he was drinking a lot, but was that normal? I mean, do you know what I mean?
Yes. I actually I was explaining this to a friend the other day about finding a bag of dirty deeds in the basement.
Yes.
And I remember finding this bag, and this bag, I won't get into too many details what was in it, but it was illegal stuff. It was sexual stuff. It was a bag of collections that he had put in, and it was hidden in the basement. And I remember finding this bag and confronting him about it, and him laughing about it. And then it was kind of a joke. We both just kind of giggled about how silly this bag was, and let's not find another dirty deeds bag in the basement when you're down there doing God knows what, doing whatever with your phone. And looking back, and even just the other day explaining this to a friend, how horrifying it was to find it, how it was certainly not a joke. It's nothing to laugh about. And it's disgusting and embarrassing and kind
Yeah.
of humiliating for me to even share that with a friend. She was like, "What did you find?" And you laughed about it? But I think that
Yeah.
maybe that goes into it because, yeah, you know my story a little bit, but that does go into a little bit of the blindness. Like, if I were to take this dirty deeds bag like seriously, what would that mean for my marriage?
Exactly, exactly. I had a clear moment where I gave myself the option to see or not see, and then there were a lot of places in my relationship with him that I just didn't see. It was only in hindsight that I could actually acknowledge the truth. But
Mhm.
here's one of the conscious moments where I actually asked myself, "Do you want to see this?" It was when I got the text from the woman on the last night of the honeymoon, and it hit me that suddenly the way she described their meetups lined up with his trips, and I knew the truth that she was telling me that. She also gave me other evidence. She described what was in his car. She described my eyeglass case, my sunglass case accurately. She really gave me a lot of proof that she had known him and that they had been together. And I remember thinking clearly, I said to myself, "You can choose to pretend you never knew this and things will go on as they were. Or you can go ahead and confront this and it's going to be a mess." And then I had that moment where I like, okay, there's the options. I can do what I saw my relatives and my family do. I know that would keep things smooth and we can pretend nothing bad's happened and see how long this goes. Or I can go ahead and confront it directly. But here's where, looking back, I missed a lot. There were a lot of times where the things he said just didn't add up, and I never bothered to question it. I mean, I
Mhm.
knew that it didn't. It was like he was telling me it wasn't even 2 + 2 = 5. He was saying 2 + 2 = 7, and I just like, oh, okay,
Or
yeah,
20.
oh, I know, like, oh, sure, yeah, that works for me. But when I look back and I was writing it, I had to then face those moments and say, oh no, something big else was happening here. I just wasn't ready to acknowledge that.
Where do you think that comes from, that questioning? Like, when you said to yourself, "I'm either gonna take this route and look at it, or I'm not gonna look at it and be blind to it, and things will go back to normal, and I don't have to deal with it." Like, did you take some kind of risk assessment or say, "Well, if I did this, then it would happen this way," and kind of play that tape till the end?
Yeah, it's interesting because I know myself. I mean, sure, I just told you 2 + 2 = 7 and 20. But sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I'm able to sort of see it clearly and know myself and know what I can do and what I could not do. And I knew at that moment that I couldn't handle the lack of integrity with myself.
Mhm.
That for me to pretend that I didn't know that he'd been seeing another, at least I didn't know there was more women. I just knew of the one. But for me to pretend that he had this relationship with a woman was going to violate something essential inside of me and that I couldn't tolerate that violation. I think part of that's my autism, that I really like things to be what they seem, and it was too distressing. But honestly, I know I was blind in a lot of other areas. I mean, he did a lot of strange things that truly didn't add up, and I allowed it to make sense to me, even though it shouldn't have made sense. That if you and I now have a kind of relationship, if I really had a doubt about something and I would say, "What do you think of this?" And I told you to like, no, there's something really wrong here. But
Mhm.
I didn't run it past anybody, and I didn't bother to ask deeper questions because for me, here's why I think now looking back that I was blind to it. And these are some of the things that Dr. Freyd in her book talks about is that I needed him.
Yeah.
I was moving into a new country and didn't have the command of the language and going to do business there.
Mhm.
And I had already bought all this, property and was starting the business already up. He already had been written in as a partner with me. We were co-leading in this. I depended on him heavily. I needed him. So here I'm finding all this out after that, and I'm now supposed to undo all of this. How do you undo it when it's time sensitive and is already spinning up? I didn't know practically how to do it. Now, to me today, what is said, you just stop. You just start calling the attorneys and you talk to the real estate agent and you stop, and okay, maybe it's going to cost you some money, but you don't keep moving. This is going to fail. But the me then didn't know and didn't get it. So I felt an enormous amount of dependence. That was one of my big reasons.
I could relate to that. Absolutely. I think it's not that I needed him as a person, but the story I created around our life. You know, we've got the 3 kids, the beautiful marriage, the beautiful wedding. All of our friends and family are together. We're on the external, like outside, it looks like the perfect marriage.
Yeah.
And that's what I depended on, was that look. And I mean, you know me a little bit when it comes to what my insecurities are, which is this try to stay perfect and make everything look great on the outside and no one gets to see the broken on the inside. So I think the brokenness is what I was blind to. I was
Yeah.
blind to how broken we really were, and how things were not, I had zero control over what was happening in my life. I was being steamrolled all the time. I was just kind of like putting my hands up and ignoring everything, and in at the cost of making everything look really perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
I
that's what I
there
needed.
there was you put out a video that was super powerful a while back that I know got a lot of traction too. It was the wedding cake moment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Which you helped me discover what that was, because I shared that with you when we were
Yeah.
together, and, I always looked at it and went, "Ugh, I just didn't like it," but I didn't you really took it to the depths of what it meant for my marriage and made so much sense.
But it's interesting that even in that moment, even now, do you see the blindness?
Yeah.
It was hard for you to because I saw that video. For those of you who've never seen this, there's a
Mm,
series of images caught of him feeding her the cake. And, she's all excited. You looked gorgeous. It was a beautiful wedding. You looked fantastic. And he already was gripping you to hold you down and you weren't
mhm.
aware of it. And then he smashes the cake in your face and ruins your makeup. But I also think he ruined the dress too, didn't he? Didn't he get
Yeah,
that on the dress as well?
he had
He sh-
shoved it down the dress. So picture number 1 was the gripping of the cake, a gripping of me
yeah.
with the cake in perfect, is all intact, and I'm smiling ready to have this cake,
Yep.
feeding each other the cake. Second picture was the smashing in my face, and then this third picture, you see cake on my face, down my dress, and him going for another chunk with
Yes,
his
yes.
hand.
And interesting, when you look at the first picture, you can already tell you're alarmed, that something's going wrong because the look on your face is you're bracing. You're bracing yourself.
Mm,
And then
mhm,
there's a series, of course, then he attacks you. It's an assault essentially. And then you're suffering this assault publicly. And what's interesting though is that it it wasn't ever commented on what this means about a man willing to do this to a woman he's saying I do to for the rest of his life. He's
mhm.
willing to assault you publicly in front of everybody.
Yeah.
And yet I know I had those same moments. I mean, my wedding was just as big of a disaster in other ways as yours. Mine was he showed up just a half an hour before the wedding to marry me, and I find out shortly later that he had just come from another person's house. He had cheated on me that night. So here he's saying his vows and weeping in front of everybody when he has the scent of another woman on him. I mean, so
Mhm.
there's these huge like glaring inconsistencies in both of our even that early in these relationships. And yet I didn't ask myself, why would he need to leave on a Thursday for a Saturday wedding and leave me alone with all the final details and then show up a few hours before? That just isn't that. Why would he need to do that? There's no reason to get supposedly quote unquote a gift ready for me.
Mhm,
What gift
mhm.
takes 48 hours to get ready?
Right.
It's just,
Yeah. It's we don't think about it, we don't question it. I think it's the investment we have in these relationships. I mean, just even a wedding, it's already done. He's already showed up to the wedding. You've said your vows. So we almost like, okay, the scent of another woman. Okay, cake in my face. Well, we're
yeah,
here already. We've invested. We've shown up and he's shown up. So let's just not talk about it. If I were to talk about that in my today row, the healthy one that's done work, I would have that conversation and say,
yeah,
I could easily turn around and not sign the marriage certificate. This was not right. Why did
yeah,
you do that? And I have the strength now. I don't have that. I didn't have that then.
yeah.
But seeing that, it's like, part of that is humiliation. I think we're embarrassed as well.
Yes, yes, there is a part of that oh, yes, thank you for saying that. I had heard that widows make a lot of mistakes and they get into trouble and they do a lot of stupid things. And I had a really huge need to not be that person. Huge need
Mm,
to not show that I had done two things too fast. I was making too many rapid decisions based upon not enough information, that I was desperate. I didn't want people to see and I didn't want to hear, I told you so. I really didn't want to hear that.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I end
Yeah.
up, of course, ultimately really eating it because I come home with my, two pieces of luggage and I'm on my son's floor in a new city where I don't know. I mean, like the
It's like
ultimate,
the walk of shame. It's
I
like the
know.
walk of shame.
Yeah, that's
Right?
right. Reminds me of Game of Thrones where Cersei has to walk through the street literally naked. It's like that's how I felt. Like, yeah, I'm publicly like the whole Facebook community who thought, oh, this is a fairy tale romantic story. Like, oh no, it was a nightmare. Not doing my public walk.
I wonder if thinking about just knowing that that's inevitable would help. If I
Mm,
knew that I would inevitably have to have the public walk of shame and tell my friends and family, hey, guess what? We weren't as perfect as you thought. It's actually the house of cards have fallen, and this is what my marriage was, and I have to divorce him. If I were to just know that instead of trying to keep it all together and hold it all together and ignore all of the bad that was happening in our marriage, all the abuse, all of the neglect, everything that he had done, everything that I was going through. If I were just to tell myself like doing all of this isn't going to avoid, like I'm not going to not have to do this walk of shame. It's going to happen.
yeah.
If
Yeah.
only I knew that and were to tell myself that, like, just go through this pain right now cuz you're going to eventually have to, with the tail between your legs walk down that street and say, "Hey, guess what? I'm divorcing."
Yeah, yeah. Here's even another piece that I wish I had known. I think I know today. I hope you know it today too. Is that anybody who willingly lines up to watch that display and then throw mud at me for it,
Mm,
somebody has never been somebody that's supportive and loved me and really in my corner, and that
yeah.
and that 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 the courageous people, the ones that have the ability to sort of be okay are the ones who can tolerate looking at their own shame and their own sense of betrayal, of self-betrayal. I betrayed myself very
Mhm.
severely in that relationship. In fact, I don't know if you knew this, that Olivia Moore was almost called The Betrayal of Me, Confessions
Oh,
of a Sex
really?
Addict's Wife. Yeah. The Betrayal of Me. And I bounced around that for a long time. And then I realized it wasn't just about sex addiction. It was way more than that. And yes, it was about self betrayal, but it was about how I was duped. I think that's the other piece is that I also feel like we're participating with an uninformed culture that loves to pile on victims and fails to point the finger at abusers. Because in a perfect world, you did not make your ex who he is.
Hmm.
I did not chase my ex out into the arms of other women. He did that. He was doing that way before he ever met me. It had nothing to do with me. He just
Mhm.
deceived me. Your ex deceived you as well and sold you something that wasn't true. And
Mhm.
so, even the shame, in a way, the shame doesn't belong to us, it belongs to them. Shame on them for doing that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I actually really like Love You More much better because thinking about, okay, the betrayal of me, that's now you taking responsibility
Mm,
for betraying yourself, which is what was the byproduct of the abuse. It wasn't
yeah.
something you chose to do. Love You More, you chose to leave. You chose
Yeah.
to break free. You love you more.
Yeah. Thank you for that. You always are great with way turning phrases like that.
So it turns into a positive, right? That's what I
Yeah.
love about that is we choose us. At looking back, yeah, we can be sad for the woman we once was, the person we were in that relationship because we weren't choosing us at that time. Now we
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, so I would love to help people know how to recognize when there is some blindness going because here's the problem. There's
Mhm.
different types of knowledge. You know that you know something, then there's the type of knowledge where you know that you don't know. Then unfortunately, there's the type where you don't know but you think you know. And then there's the type where you don't know and that you don't know. And this unfortunately falls into that last category. We're asking ourselves to become aware of something that we're not aware that we're not even aware of it.
Yeah,
Do you
I
see
feel
the
like
bind? Mhm,
that's a huge bind. I feel like that was most of my marriage. I would
mhm.
say that a lot is, "Oh, well, yeah, I don't know what I don't know. I didn't know what
Yeah,
I didn't know because you don't even know you're supposed to know it.
Right, right,
That's
right.
yeah.
Here's one of my regular prayers in that marriage. This is what I would pray. I'd say, God, you know the truth and you know what I don't know. And please show it to me.
Show me.
I need you to show me the truth. Put it right smack in my face so I can't deny it. That's what I used to pray. Literally, I prayed that a lot near the end of that relationship. But here's what I missed. I did sense, and I saw it in your photos on that wedding picture too. I sensed the ambiguity and the confusion. I
Mhm.
sensed that things didn't quite add up and it bothered me. I felt that, offness, Did you feel that too?
So you saw that in my face?
Yeah, and I saw not that you were confused, but I saw that there was you were being put in a bind, that you
Mhm.
sensed something was wrong in that picture. You were gearing up, bracing. That was the word I used. You braced. That
Mhm.
brace is a sense something's wrong. You're bracing for
Danger.
impact. Yeah, you're bracing
Mhm.
for impact, which
Mhm.
it really literally was an impact. But
Yeah.
we often feel that bracing though, and it can feel like a lot of different feelings. It can feel like confusion, can feel like overwhelmed, can feel like um, off. It just feels doesn't make sense. It feels
Yeah.
off, you know?
Yeah, it bothered me a lot because I think one of the words that I used as a theme for my marriage was trapped. And trapped was something that came up a lot in therapy was the feeling of being trapped. How do I set myself free? How do I break free from this feeling? How do I escape? It was like really my exit strategy when I worked on leaving the marriage was escaping because it was
Mm,
almost feeling like I was imprisoned, right? I was trapped. And then leaving, my freedom was really freedom, like being released from an institution where I was kept like under, not under, against my will. So
yeah,
having that be kind of the image of the start of our marriage, the image of bracing and being held, confined in between a table and my abuser would is trapped. And
yeah,
so the confusion is like, well, why am I here? I can
right.
freely walk away from this. I don't need to be here, but I'm choosing to be here trapped. That's the deception is that we think we're safe, but we're actually quite in danger.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I realized that I did things that were confusing. Like, who says I love this person? They never felt safer and hires a PI. You don't do that. That's
That's
inconsistent.
confusion.
Yes,
Yeah.
confusion. Or the way I waited for his text messages and I felt like I could never get a hold of him, and yet he then had such fantastic times with him. That's confusion. Or
Mm,
I mean, I could go on and on. There's all these, or who leaves their soon to be bride all excited to get married, but checks out 48 hours before, literally not around with all my family flying in and leaves me alone with that. And I'm angry. I'm really angry. That doesn't make sense. Loving
no.
people don't do that. So there's where it was off. It was just this wrongness that I somehow, here's the sad part for me, it was so normal. That wrongness had been a part of my life for a very long time. So I was familiar with it. I didn't know it shouldn't be there. So, but I'm glad I know it today. And I really don't want that for anybody else. I certainly didn't want it for you. I mean, those pictures watching that cake in the face thing is painful, you
Hmm.
know? So
Yeah,
I
it
think,
is painful. It's
yeah,
almost as if well, it's kind of like the story of seeing those inappropriate pictures on the coffee table.
yeah,
You look back and you go, "Whoa, that was in my house the whole time?"
yeah,
That's what I went through, like, seeing those pictures in a different light from another perspective. I couldn't really talk about that to anyone else. So sharing those with you and you giving me that perspective kind of I was very disgusted by those pictures. Didn't even
yeah.
think of it for 14 years.
Right, right. Yeah, so I guess my self-help tip for those listening today is to, if you feel something feels wrong or off or it's not making sense, or you just get that funny goosebump weird sensation, or you feel trapped like you grow, or you even feel like I need this person, like I felt dependent. I just felt like I'm stuck. That's how I felt. I think that's a good sign that maybe we're blind. Maybe there's something happening here that we haven't slowed down enough to really like challenge. That it's not that you're willingly doing this to yourself. It's that your dependency is so high that the truth is scary. It's scarier than not not knowing. And so that you've blinded yourself out of protectiveness. But maybe that's a sign that you need to take a hard look. I know for me, writing it down, like I've said this before, but literally creating a literally creating a scene where you write down exactly what happened, what he said or she said, and then what you said and what you did helped me to see where there were gaps, where there were things that were off and inconsistent. Loving people don't disappear 48 hours before a wedding. Loving people don't smash, take down an expensive dress on their beautifully dressed bride in public. These are the things that, just like having pornography in the house on the coffee table, that's not, that's sick. There's something wrong with it. But it's hard to see it because knowing forces a decision. And sometimes we're not
Mhm.
ready for the decision. So let's
Mhm.
talk about that over on the podcast extra, how to get ready for maybe you're starting to see, and you've got a big decision coming, how we made that transition. So we'll hop over there and talk about that. But thank you so much for talking about this with me, because I know it's a tough one because it's on the
Yeah.
edge of feeling like, well, then you're saying it's the victim's fault. No, no, no. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we were deceived, and it was, and they put us in a terrible bind. And sometimes we can't get out of a bind because of how much is stacked on top of that decision makes it too hard to see. So I know
Mhm.
I'm not placing responsibility on victims for this, but it does make us vulnerable.
It does. Yes.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? Find me at Kerry McAvoy, Ph.D. Now you don't need to wait a week to get your next podcast fix. Join Breaking Free from Narc Abuse at Substack.com to get exclusive audio content for subscribers. To sign up, click the link in the show notes. And whether you're in, consider leaving, or have left a narcissistic relationship, find community support at my Toxic Free Relationship Club. You can learn about this resource as well as others at KerryMcAvoyPhD.com. And I'll see you back here next week.